to move on, I will monitor the chat. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being patient this morning while we tested something which clearly I have to work on. It did not work. So I appreciate your patience. But today, you're in for a great treat. Jen Davis, who is our Google specialist, is going to walk you through understanding Google pay-per-click analytics. The more you understand, the more there is. The more you look at it, the more your head spins. So I'm very happy to have Jen working for me, and I'm going to let her go and start talking about Google pay-per-click analytics, and I will keep track of the questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I apologize that the camera's not working, but just know that I'm a beautiful young woman. We'll go with that, right, Virginia?
Absolutely. 29
right.
and fabulous.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get started with understanding our Google PPC Analytics. So first, why is Google PPC Analytics important? So what we'll say is if you aren't measuring your paid search program within Google Analytics, you are potentially leaving money on the table. And who wants to do that, right? So when we combine our measurements, our paid search powers with additional measurement tools in Google Analytics, that leads to smarter goal tracking, sharper pictures of the people behind your conversion, and better insight into the full value of your campaigns. Now, we'll go through this in just a second, but paid search gives you a lot of data. However, Google Analytics gives you more data. And when we pair the two together, we've got this powerful measurement tool that can actually allow us to make very informed decisions. So let's talk first about the 10 most important Google ad measurements. These are all measurements that you can find within the Google Ads interface. These are like things like impressions, how many people see your ads, the cost, how much you're spending, how many clicks you've received, your average cost per click, the number of conversions. That can be, a lead form, a transaction like an e-commerce transaction, whatever you define as your conversion. It can tell you how many impressions you're getting by campaign, what your click-through rate is for ad groups, what it is for campaigns, what your cost per conversion is. You can get that down to the keyword level, and just your overall click-through rate. So these are the 10 most important and pretty much cover almost everything within Google Ads. Now you can see all of this information at the account level, the campaign level, the ad group level, the keyword level, and you can also siphon it off into ad content, site links, depending on all the things that you have going within your paid search account. So you can go really high level or get it down to a very granular level. Okay, this is great. And this tells you how you're bringing people in to the website, how many people are seeing the ad, how many people are clicking on it, and ultimately coming to your website and maybe doing a transaction. But there's a big gap between when they see the ad and the transaction, basically, and make a decision. So what are they doing on your website? And that's where Google Analytics comes in. If you use Google Analytics and Google Ads together, you can actually learn about what your customers do on your site after they click your ad and even before they make the transaction. So that gap of information, click on ad to transaction potentially, you've got all this data that you can take a look at when you're using Google Analytics. So let's talk a little bit about what Google Analytics kind of measures. And this is just some high-level information. You can slice and dice this information in a lot of different ways, but things that we can take a look at is things like how many pages did they visit? What pages were actually visited? Not only the number. How much time did they spend on each page? Average on all of the pages on the site in total? How many of those people are repeats versus new visitors? Is your paid search bringing in new users that haven't heard about you before? What are those frequency of the visitors, whether they come through paid search or something else, another source, for instance? Are they coming every day? Are they coming every week? And some of that's going to depend on, obviously, the type of site you have, your product or service as well. Bounce rate, and we'll get a little bit more into something like this, but are they visiting more than one page? Are they going to the landing page that you're sending them and then they're bouncing off and not coming back, for instance? Where are they located? Are they located in Colorado versus New York? Is that a difference? Do you need to treat your New York customers different than your Colorado customers? Or are they coming from overseas, for instance? You can see a little bit more level of detail in your transaction conversions, particularly if you're an e-commerce website within Google Analytics. So you can actually see what products they're purchasing, what they paid for shipping, for instance, if there was tax involved, all those types of things, and then relate it back to like a paid search visitor or another type of another source. You can also see visitor demographics. So this is dependent, of course, on what the person has shared, if they have a Google account or the like. But this could be things like their age range, their gender, for instance. You can also see things like visitor interest. So again, if they have a Google account, they're signed in. Have they been searching for your product or service? Are they in market for your product or service, for instance? Or are they, is it just hobbies that they have? Like maybe you're selling flowers, but a lot of your customers are marathon runners. You might be able to see that information within, again, it all depends on what the user has shared and if they're signed into their account as well. But there could be some useful information, not even related to your business and what you sell, but maybe other things that your demographic is interested in. You can also see what kind of technology they're using. Are they on a mobile phone? Are they on an iPad? Are they on a desktop computer? What browser are they using, for instance? You can even see down to, are they using Windows? What level of Windows? What Mac iOS they're using? You can see what content they've been interested in, what pages they came in on. With paid search, you should know this already because you're indicating that, but you could look at other sources. You could look to see where they exited, for instance. And then site speed, very important for SEO, but also important for paid search because our quality score within paid search is reliant on how fast our site is. And if you've got slow loading landing pages, that can have an impact on your bounce rate and ultimately your conversion and potentially your ROI. And then there's things like site search. If you have the ability to search on your site, you can set that up in Google Analytics. So do your paid search visitors come in and search for certain things that maybe they're not finding on your landing page? This is just, maybe 15 examples, and probably the biggest ones here. But Google Analytics gives you a lot of information. And again, you can look at just your paid search visitors in these different ways, or you can look at your entire visitors across the site in all of these different ways. But it really, for Google Ads, it connects impressions and clicks to what they ultimately do on your website. So, couple things to get this going. The most important step is actually you have to make sure your Google Ads, AdWords account, and analytics are linked. This is not done automatically. So you may have created Google Ads accounts or AdWords. It's called Google Ads now, but sometimes we still refer to it as AdWords. And you may have created a Google Analytics account, but the two actually don't talk to each other very well until you actually make the connection. So if you don't make the connection, your traffic sources will still come into analytics as Google paid search, but you won't get any more details. You won't get your campaign data, you won't get your ad group data, your keyword data, your cost data, for instance. So what you need to do within your Google Analytics account is there a section called product linking, and you want to click on the AdWords linking and connect your analytics account to your AdWords. So again, you're going to do this in your analytics admin interface, and you're going to connect your AdWords account to it, okay? And until you do that, you will not get all the information that you ultimately will need in order to adequately see the data and analyze it from your AdWords account. You will get some, but it's very limited, so you need to make sure that you do this. And it's actually very easy. Once you do it, you just have to send a request, and it's a couple buttons. The second important step is to make sure what is called within Google Ads, auto tagging is turned on. And you're going to do this in the Google Ads interface. Usually this is turned on. However, depending on who set up your account, they may have turned this off. So you need to make sure that it's here. And it's within the settings section of Google Ads, auto tagging. You check it, And basically what this will do is it allows campaign, ad group, and keyword information to come into Google Analytics if the two are connected. So again, 2 steps, connection, and then make sure auto tagging is turned on. And ultimately all of your data will come into Google Analytics then. Okay, but there's still one more step after that. And that's ultimately you have to use this data. Connections and auto tagging only brings the data in. If it just sits there, it does you no good. And the best way I can suggest that you use this data is you develop these if-then scenarios based on what you're seeing. So I'm going to stop before we jump into that because I do have a couple if-then scenarios, and I want to see if there's any questions or comments so far.
I'm going to give them a minute, Jen, to type their questions in. Please do. In the beginning, back in one of the slides, you had ad groups and campaigns. Can you define the difference between those two for our viewers?
Yeah, so in Google Ads, you start with an account. The first thing you do is build a campaign. You want to build campaigns that are tightly themed. So for instance, if I'm selling Nike running shoes, and I'm also selling Adidas running shoes, I probably want to set up 2 campaigns, one for Nike, one for Adidas. Now, in the campaign, you then break it out into ad groups. And what you do there is potentially break it down a little bit further. So in my Nike campaign, I might have an ad group for blue Nike running shoes and one for green Nike running shoes. And the reason why we do that is that we have these tight themes, then we can assign ads to each one of those ad groups. So in my ad for my blue running shoes, I'm going to make sure I'm using the word blue running shoes. Where in my green one, I want to make sure I'm using the word green running shoes. So it's just a way to kind of compartmentalize whatever it is that your product or service is and getting it down to, don't have to go down to the very granular level, but you do in some way want to make sure that your keywords and your ad and ultimately your landing page are all relevant to each other because that helps our quality score. So being able to do that, you break it down from overall campaign and then into ad groups. In your ad groups is where you put your keywords and your ads.
At this point, we do not have any questions.
Okay, great. So let's go a couple if-then scenarios. Sorry. Let me give you a couple examples first of what we're going to review. So for instance, things to review within Google Analytics in regards to your paid search traffic is, let's look at your landing pages, the URL that the ad took the searcher to, and the bounce rate associated with it. Super important. One of the first things you'll look at when you look at this data. You also want to look at your ROI or your ROAS or whatever your cost revenue KPI is. It could also be a cost per conversion if you're tracking leads perhaps. And are we doing this we want to do this at a campaign, an ad group, a keyword level? And are we meeting or not meeting the goal that we have set for this? And then ultimately we want to look at engagement, click-through rate, time on site, repeat visits. Now, a lot of people will say, but I'm more interested in leads. I'm more interested in product conversions. And I would agree with that. However, if you're not getting engagement as well, you're most likely not getting the conversions. So while you don't want to just have traffic coming to your site and to be paying for that and not have them converting, you do want to look at some things with engagement to give yourself an idea of what's going on. So let's go through some scenarios with that. So then let's start with our landing pages. And if we have a high bounce rate on the landing page. So if there's a high bounce rate on the landing page, then I really need to reevaluate that landing page. Look at it from a speed perspective. Is it loading fast? Is it optimized for the technology that they're using? Are all my paid search visitors coming through on mobile and it's not a mobile optimized page that I'm sending to? And even making sure that the call to action is clear on that page. So there's a lot of things that we can evaluate on the landing page if the bounce rate is high. Now let's talk about a high bounce rate. Let me back up a second. So in some cases, a bounce rate could be 70% on a landing page from an ad. That may happen, and you might want to take a look at either the page as well as the keywords. But if you're getting somewhere between 40 and 50%, Sounds high, but for paid search, it actually isn't. So you want to really look at something that's over 50% of a bounce rate. And the first thing you do is you look at the page. The next thing that, if you optimize a page, see if that works. If that doesn't work, then maybe we try what we'll call an A/B test, and send it to a different landing page for a short period of time, or split the traffic to go to 2 different pages and see if one page is performing better. And then the other thing to do is to make sure that your ad text is giving the expectation, and that the landing page meets the reality of what they're expecting. So if you're talking about blue running shoes and you take them to a page with red high heels, you're not meeting their expectation. So again, just making sure the connection is always there. So those are things that you would start with. And there's probably, you can come up with 10 more. Is it the right keyword and things like that? But these are the things to kind of start with. If we look at it, if we have something like an ROI that's over-optimized, and what I mean an over-optimized ROI, so if your profitability needs to be, the ROI needs to be 100%, and you're at 1,000%, that means you're over-optimized, and you could probably spend more money and get more, and maybe bring that down to an acceptable rate of 100%, but you could be doing 100 more transactions. So when you're over-optimized, you're way over your goal when it comes to an ROI or a cost per conversion. You really want to look to see if you can expand and get more transactions or conversions closer towards your goal. You're basically leaving money on the table. So if we look at this over-optimized ROI, or again, whatever the cost per transaction, ROAS, one of the things you want to do is increase your cost per click on performing keywords and ensure you have the top position. So if you have a keyword that is converting every day, but you're in position 2 or 3, try boosting the bid. See what happens when you get to position 1. Are you actually getting 2 or 3 or 4 more conversions, for instance? You might want to expand the keywords with ones that are similar to the ones performing. So if you have blue running shoes, you might want to try different colored. If you offer those running shoes, you might want to try synonyms like running shoes for marathons or something like that, and start to expand into a long tail, what we call a long tail, particularly with keywords that are 3 or 4 words as a phrase. And then also increase your budget on those campaigns with high performance. So again, if you're getting 10 conversions a day on a campaign, try opening up the budget and see if you can get 15 or maybe 20. Know there's a point when you're probably spending as much as you can against your goal as far as an ROI, ROAS cost per, for instance. There is a point of diminishing returns. And certainly if you're getting 10 conversions and you grow to 15, those last 5 might not be as profitable as the first 10. But as long as they're within your range, it's definitely an opportunity to go for. Next, I'm going to talk about the if-then if we're under-optimized.
Hey, Jen,
yes.
Can I interrupt you here? I think that was a lot of really great information on the last slide, but let's make sure they understand what ROI is and what optimized is. That the return on investment, okay, it's how much you get back. But return on investment isn't dollar for dollar.
Correct.
Right? So I think we need to spend a little bit of time there and the word optimized as we go through your if-then statement so everyone gets that, if that's okay.
Yeah, so a return on investment, or there's also return on ad spend, ROAS, ROAS, as it might be referred to. So it's the number that as a business you are feeling profitable at. So if I'm selling a product, I am willing to spend $2 in order to then make $3 in revenue, for instance. So making sure that my cost of ad spend is lower than the amount of revenue that's coming in. Now, what you need to also take into consideration is potentially your product cost, your labor cost, your overhead costs. I'm using a very simplistic example of I'm spending $2 on ads, I'm going to make $3. You assume that is a $1 profit. But obviously there's more that goes into it than just ad spend as well. So That's the number that you're comfortable with as far as how much you're willing to spend, include any overhead product costs that you need to, and how much you will ultimately sell the product for. Same concept with return on ad spend, only that one is very particular to just looking at the cost that you're spending on the ad spend to the cost of the product or the service, for instance. And what we mean by optimized, again, so optimized would be I am at the goal. If I need an ROI return of for every $2 I spend, I get $3 back, which leads to $1 in profitability. If I am optimized, that is what I'm continuously hitting or within that range, very, within a couple cents there. If I'm over optimized, I might be spending $2, but I might be selling my product for 10 and I have a profit of $8. Great. You just have to decide, is that too profitable? Would I be more willing to spend $4 to get 2 transactions? And, and there's obviously a diminishing returns there. But trying to get more transactions at a less profitable rate, where at the end of the day, you are still at your profitable rate. And if you're under optimized, you're most likely spending more than you are bringing back in. You think
Thank
that
you.
helped for Virginia? Yeah.
I did. Thank you.
Sure. All right. So then if we go into our under optimized, as in we're not meeting the goal that we need for either profitability or cost per transaction, what we want to do, so if that happens, then we should look at pausing or decreasing bids on non-performing keywords. I think everybody's first reaction is to pause keywords. I would first test out decreasing bids. So if we're looking at a keyword that isn't producing very well, it isn't producing any transactions or conversions, or is only doing it maybe once a week, look at the position. If we're in the top position, maybe we decrease our bid and we slide down to position 2 or 3, less cost, but if we can still garner 1 or 2 conversions a week, that actually might hit our goal, for instance. If that doesn't work, that's when we start pausing those keywords. You can also do that at the ad group level or even the campaigns. So again, if I go back to my Nike shoes versus my Adidas shoes, Nike shoes as a campaign as a whole may not be doing it after I've made adjustments to the keywords, I've made adjustments to maybe the ad groups. I might just have to pause my Nike because I can't compete there, or whatever the reason is. It has nothing to do necessarily with my paid search account. It's just might be a competition. So I might pause some ad groups in there or the whole campaign, particularly if it has a high cost and a low or a 0 ROI, for instance. So you start at the keyword level and you work your way up in order to see if you can optimize, and if you can't, you ultimately might just have to shut down that particular advertising. I want to stop and see if there's any questions on kind of our ROI if and then scenario. All right, so let's talk about engagement. And again, we don't necessarily just run paid search for traffic, but you do want to see some engagement, because that will give you hints as to whether it's a problem with your website where you're ultimately not engaged, where you're not converting. So again, this is kind of the idea, is it optimized? Are we over optimized? It's really hard to call this over optimized, to tell you the truth, because any type of engagement is good. But if you want to see that people are visiting like 2 or 3 pages of your site, whatever, based on the size of your site, based on the product or service that you do, you may notice that after they visited 3 pages, they tend to convert more. Whatever that goal is, if you're at that goal or above that goal, definitely try to recreate that. Create similar ads, similar landing pages, keyword match tapes in a similar way to other campaigns that are doing good with engagement, to see if you could actually increase your engagement elsewhere. Different products, different services, those types of things. And of course, again, increase budgets and bids for more engagement and even more data. More data is your friend here. The more data you have, the more informed decisions you can make. So again, you don't want to just have traffic for traffic's sake, but engagement levels do give you some insight. And ultimately, a person who is engaged will ultimately convert in some manner. If we have the opposite, where we have a lot of people that are not engaged with the site, they're hitting they're hitting the landing page, they're going, in some cases, they're spending just a couple seconds on the site. It's usually a site problem. It's not necessarily a keyword problem within the Google Ads account. So you really need to look at the site, and everything from load time to clear call to action to are you taking them to the right page? Is your site mobile friendly? All of those things. So you usually start with the site because generally it's a site problem. However, once you do that and you still don't see any improved engagement, you do need to reevaluate keywords and maybe just landing pages for areas to improve, or a different landing page, for instance. And if after that you've gone through the site, made changes, you've made changes to your campaigns, for instance, if there really is no improvement, I would pause those keywords, start at the keyword level, go up to ad groups potentially and pause those, and eventually the campaigns. Now, if these are all campaigns or keywords that are converting, we don't really care about engagement. It's the combination of no engagement as well as no conversions. That was it on my if-then scenarios. So I just want to stop and see if there are any questions or any more that we want to go into depth there before we jump into the next part.
So far, no one has typed in a question. We'll give them a second here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see anyone typing. Let's move on.
Okay. So we gave some scenarios of when there are issues either with your site, with the Google Ads, how to understand the data, and what to do. But in all honesty, sometimes it's not you, it's them. And this can simply be the amount of competition, the amount the competition is spending, perhaps. So there is also within Google Ads a report called Auction Insights. And it's a report. It doesn't give you full details of what your competitor is spending or as far as like an overall account, anything particular with their account, but it will give you kind of an idea of where you sit in comparison to them. So when you run this report within Google Ads, it will show you the top URLs that are coming up at the same time that you are coming up. And it will provide the impression share. So if you can look at the screenshot, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the last one is labeled you. This is the account I was looking at. This is, we'll assume this is my company. But there are 5 people that have that first row as impression share. They have a much higher impression share than I do. I'm only spending $100 in this account, but potentially, so that's giving me less than 10% of the available impression share. However, the top one is getting about a third. The top 2 are actually getting about a third of that impression share. And then you also have things like overlap rate. How many times are you showing up against them, for instance? And then things like position above rate. So how many times am I showing with them, but how many times are they also showing above me, for instance? So again, this can give you some insight. That doesn't mean you start running, that I need to triple my budget or quadruple it or something. But there are times that there's a lot of competition out there that you need to look at this and see and, make some determination in your budget. In your business, can you raise your budget? Who are you up against? Are there other things that maybe you should be advertising that maybe can be more profitable for you, that you have less competition and can be a part of? So sometimes it's not you, but them. And just so you know, too, the Auction Insight report, you can run at a campaign and an ad group level. So you can really get detailed, because in some cases, I can have a competitor in one ad group that doesn't show up in another ad group that I am advertising with, just based on the themes. And they might not have, I've got green Nike shoes and blue Nike shoes, but they only have green Nike shoes. So you can see that difference by ad group as well. All right, couple more things on insights that you can get out of Google Analytics. So one of the things you can look at is you can review your conversions by time of day, as well as day of the week, and then adjust that in the Google Ad schedule for higher bids. So let's say there's this theory, at least prior to COVID, that a lot of times between about 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., there was a lot of online shopping. Usually around lunchtime, people would take a break, maybe eat a sandwich at their desk, and ultimately do some online shopping. You can take a look at that and see if that happens, for instance, Monday through Friday. I think the most popular days at one point was like Tuesday and Wednesday, again, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., usually local time. So you can look at that in Google Analytics and understand, are you getting more conversions during that time of day, and the day? You can then go into Google Ads and say during the time of 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Tuesday, I am willing to bid 20% higher than normal in order to gain more traffic and hopefully more conversions, because a lot of people search and ultimately convert during that time. So this is a really useful way. Again, you can get it down to the time of day. Again, you can look at this by ad group and keyword level once you've linked your accounts. So there's a lot of ways that you can slice and dice this. What I would also caution is don't get too far into the weeds on keywords. Look at it from really an ad group and a campaign level. Otherwise, it's way too much data. But know that you also can. A couple more things too is that don't forget to look at your paid search traffic and how it's performing against other sources. I'm not one of those people that would recommend, if you're doing email marketing, affiliate marketing, paid search, social, you don't siphon it down to just the best performing source, because most customers, depending on product or service, but they can have anywhere from 5 to 15 touches before they hit your website, whether that's through a social touch, then a paid search touch, then a affiliate touch. So they may come in anywhere from 5 to 15 times through different sources before they ultimately convert. I think very early on, before people understood the customer journey, they would simply look at paid search versus email versus affiliate and say, this one's performing the best, cut everything else and put all the budget to paid search, for instance. I don't suggest doing that, but what I do suggest is to make sure that your paid search is performing at least similar to other forms of advertising as well as organic. Ultimately, you're paying for this traffic, so you do want to make sure that it's performing. You don't want it to have the least performing. It's probably a place where you're spending the most money potentially, because you have potentially not only the ad cost, the cost per click, but you also might have an agency cost as well. It just depends on how you have this set up. So you definitely want to see how it's performing and know that you ultimately have a lot of control in the traffic that you're bringing. And if this is one that is underperforming, really going back to those if-then statements, digging in and trying to figure out how you can better the account. There's certain things like, to some degree, social, if you're just doing kind of, daily posts and stuff and followers, there are things that you can do, but ultimately you don't have as much control. You still have control, but paid search is something that you have a lot of control over and making sure that it is actually performing. Other things that you can do too is just, you can look at this at a keyword level. So for example, when you make the connection, this will actually bring in your cost data. So you can see how people are, how many clicks you got, what it costs you, what your average CPC cost is, what's that bounce rate for that particular keyword. You can see the second keyword here, emergency homeless shelter. Well, I only have 3 clicks, so this is not a lot of data. I think I'm only looking at 7 days here. It had 100% bounce rate. Is that a good keyword for me? Three clicks. I'm not sure I'm ready to make that decision yet. I want to expand my time frame and make sure that I'm looking at a longer time frame for that. However, I'd be concerned about 100% bounce rate. First thing I'd look at is the landing page. So things like this. So you can really get super granular on this. So not just campaign, ad groups, but down to the keyword level. But again, we want to look at some full data and also make sure it's not just a fluke. And I'll talk about that in a second. You can actually look at this at the ad content as well. So what it will actually bring in for ad content is just the headline, for instance. So we've got housing services for homeless and overnight emergency shelter, for instance. Both have 6 clicks. They've both spent about the same in cost, for instance. Um, I've got one that's got a better bounce rate than the other one. So again, taking a look at this ad content, I've got housing services for homeless, and then I also have overnight emergency shelter. So those are two different messages, but I have one that has a much higher bounce rate. Maybe I'm not taking it to the right landing page. Maybe I'm not meeting the expectation of the person who has clicked on that for an overnight emergency shelter. But it sounds like I might be meeting the needs for the housing services for the homeless just in general. So again, you can take a real deep dive into Google Ads through analytics and get this down to a keyword, ad level, site level. If you've got, click to call ads, the phone number, those types of things. So there's a lot that you can dive into. Again, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions.
I do not have any questions in the chat at this time.
Okay.
I think you guys need to get your questions ready. Jen's burning to answer some.
Right. Well, let me end with some words of wisdom. You heard me talk about the examples that I just showed. I had 3 clicks. I had 100% bounce rate. Really make sure that you're looking at trends. A day, a week, even a month may not make a trend. You are probably going to have to wait for 100 or more visitors on something in order to make a decision. Now, granted, if I've got a keyword, though, that, in 20 visits has already cost me $200 because it's a high volume, high valued keyword that costs a lot for each click, and I'm not getting any transactions, you might need to make a decision before you get 100 or so visitors because it might break the bank on that, for instance. However, don't just look at a day and go, oh, my traffic's down, something's wrong. Really expand your look. I also really suggest doing a date comparison. A couple ways, look at this week versus last week, look at this month versus last month. But don't forget to look at this week or this month compared to the same time last year. Now, also remember there are outside sources. We have things like COVID right now that are going to have an impact on things. But also remember things like holidays can have an impact, and know that holidays do change times. So if you're looking at Thanksgiving week, make sure you're looking at Thanksgiving week last year at the, not just the same, the date wise, because obviously that is a one that changes based on the year as far as the date is concerned. So just make sure you're really looking at apples to apples, and you're looking at a long enough time frame to give you some type of idea of the trend that is going on. The other thing is try to avoid analysis paralysis. Be decisive, try something, fail fast, versus this continuous analysis waiting for, the ultimate stars to align to tell you what to do. Simply, paid search, I've always said, is a little bit of art and science. There's a science to it, but there's an art to it as well. And sometimes you just have to try some things, and they're ultimately going to fail. But there's always going to be that one thing out of the 10 things that you try that actually does really well. The problem is if you don't go through the other 9, you may not learn what that 10th thing is. So try to be decisive, try something, and again, just fail fast with it if you need to. But don't get stuck in the paralysis with it. And then my last word of advice is think outside your box. That means get out of your comfort zone, And if you think about that, I mean that from an industry perspective or what you think you would want as a consumer. I have so many times that I've had companies say, well, I don't click on ads, so I don't think my customers are. It's a wrong way to think of it. Just because you don't do something doesn't mean that there are not 1,000 people out there, at least, that actually do it. And also think outside of your industry, your particular business and stuff, particularly if you have jargon within your business. Even Virginia had me stop and talk about ROAI or ROAS. That's jargon to me. Those are acronyms and things that I live with every day. But I can forget even that not everybody understands that. So make sure that you are understanding how your customers would search, but realize that that may not be the way that you would describe your product or service. But that's okay. They just don't know any better. So you really want to think like your customers, and not have your personal preferences come in and change that, or be too industry jargon related that people don't understand or won't use those as search terms. And that is it. So yes, I am burning for questions.
So I'm going to give them a minute and make a couple comments while they have time to type in their questions. Please type in your questions. The last thing you touched on where you said don't make assumptions and you're living with industry jargon, you know your business, so you have some assumptions, but you really need to let go of them. Because you and I both know we've always been surprised when we present keywords to clients that people got to their site from, and they don't understand that. Because they're things that we would have never thought of to send people to our site. Where you make a list of these are all the things that are associated with my business and my site, but that's not always what's driving traffic. We do know our business, we know what's going on, but we need to remember it's not about us, it's about them. And they're the ones that should drive us to get them to come back to our site.
Correct.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Kind of talked in a circle there, but yeah.
No, very well said. I would agree. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. We have a question. Yay! Does the amount of money spent on an ad affect ROI? A few years ago, we spent $300 on Google AdWords and received little or no ROI. I had heard that you have to spend much more. Is that correct?
No, it really depends on your product and service and potentially competition. So there is nothing to say that you have to spend $10,000. If you only have $300 to spend, you just have to do it carefully, but you also have to make sure that you are not out of the element with competition. If all of your competition is spending $100,000 and you're trying to spend 300, you're not gonna make it very far. But again, trying to find those niches and stuff. But there's nothing in Google Ads that says you have to spend this much in order to achieve success. I would also say that low budgets require more work actually than high budgets. Like I have worked with clients that have $100,000 budget plus, and while there are complicated accounts, it's actually more difficult to deal with a $300 account and get to the ROI. So there's a little bit more that you have to do.
So I want to piggyback on that in terms of giving them an example. So let's talk about the legal profession. If you're going for the word lawyer, which there's a billion lawyers and they're all trying to get you, that's not where you spend your $300 on lawyer. You would do it when you say niches. I want you to define those niches here to help them understand.
Yeah, so for example, in a lawyer example, we'll go with like bankruptcy attorney or injury attorney, or if you do employment type work, employment attorney, labor attorney, those types of things. Yeah, you definitely want to go deeper into the category, is how I would describe it. And because if you're going to spend $10 on a keyword, you want to make sure that it's the right keyword and it's actually A, what people are searching for, and B, you're actually delivering on it. So again, if all you do is bankruptcy, you need to focus on bankruptcy attorney, not just the word attorney or lawyer.
So this next question piggybacks on the first one. Do you have any ideas how to uncover those keywords that customers might use? Informal focus groups, look at competitors.
Really what I would start with is Google data, to tell you the truth. So Google does have a keyword research tool within Google Ads. So you can put in a keyword like makeup and it will spit out things to you like concealer stick or, face powder and those types of things. So it'll give you variations. That's where I would start if you need ideas. The other thing that you can do is Google has what is called a Search Console account. And when you create one of those, it will actually give you in-depth information on your organic keywords that you are already showing up for. Now, that's not to say that those, if you don't show up for a keyword, it's not going to give it, so it doesn't give you all the ideas. That's where Google Ads will. But I think the organic keywords that people are also searching is also very interesting because it can spark other ideas, which then you can put into the Google Ads keyword research tool to then spark even more ideas, for instance. It is usually very hard to ask somebody, what did you search for? Because most likely they can't remember. They most likely did 3 or 4 searches and they're not going to probably tell you the right information. So with Google holding all this data, because Google will also tell you what that keyword costs, how much search volume, how much competition, kind of rated by low, medium, and high, and those types of things. So it gives you a lot more data. So that's where I'd start with, and then break out from there, just in the sense of like, there's actually, I'm blanking on the name of it, but there is actually like, there's like SEM Rush that you can do a free account for and get all other keyword ideas as well. But go to the source first, being Google.
Google has so much data, it doesn't know what to do with it. Oh, actually, it does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
They make us pay for it. But they do. If putting all those pieces together is important, what we might want to do, Jen, is have a how to create your Google Search Console one day. That might be a good one too, to show them how to do that. But they have all the information. Think of how many times you've searched for something and you're not getting the right answer back, so you change out what your question is or what your words are to finally refine it. People do that. So Google knows that. It will give you that information back.
The other thing, too, I might suggest is do your own search, even with your industry jargon, and then look at what comes up. And in particularly on that result page, look at the links that are in blue, which is basically what's called the page title. And read the words that are in those titles before you click on them, because those can also give you keyword ideas and where Google has made a match. I'll give you an example. There was, I don't know if they're still in business, a company called PetSafe. They do like electronic wireless fences to keep dogs within a certain area without having a fence there. They also do like bark control and training collars as well. Well, their wireless fence, like their do-it-yourself wireless fence, was their most popular product. So actually, if you just did a search for the word PetSafe, everything that came up was simply their wireless fence. And that was Google making an assumption with all of their data that people that were searching for the word pet safe were searching for wireless fence as almost as a synonym. So that's other ways that you can kind of take a look at to see how Google's made relations based on how people have searched and then ultimately clicked on things.
Okay, we've taken up a lot of people's times, almost an hour. I apologize for that. There's so much information when it comes to Google. The more you know, the more you need to know. Thank you so much for coming.